In the last video, I failed to install Small Business Server because I couldn't get DNS Server installed. And the reason for that was I had a mismatch of service packs on the server. This is now reinstalled completely from scratch to base level, release to media, Windows 2003 Small Business Server. And I've tested it, and yes, I can add DNS Server. Now I'm going to crack on with the process of installing SBS, and we will do the legacy update after that. Perhaps that was my original mistake, trying to do legacy update before I'd actually installed Small Business Server. After all, legacy update is a bit of a hack. It wasn't something that existed back in the day. Let's get on with the installation of Small Business Server now. Small Business Server CD1. I've got the ISO and I've mapped that as a drive V. This time when we go through the installation, it should go a lot smoother than last time and get past the problem where we got stuck with domain configuration, which, as you probably saw in the last video, didn't give you any clues as to actually what the issue was. It doesn't show you that it was DNS Server that couldn't be installed. And this was something that went on a lot with operating systems back around this time. There weren't obvious errors. You had to dig a bit deep and you had to try and understand what was going on in the background. What was in front of you looked like a problem, but actually it was caused by something underneath that you didn't know. And in this case, it was the domain adding couldn't be done because DNS Server couldn't be added, which couldn't be added because of the service pack mismatch. I've renamed my network cards that are in the server as well back to internal and external. Although when we go through the process of the installation will change those names yet again. But for now, that made it easy for me to distinguish between the two. I'm going to stick again with ntn.local for the domain name. I think that works and it's going to be easy to use. Here are the two network cards. Again, as last time, I'm going to use the D-Link as the external network card. You'll probably notice cuts and jumps through this video because I could play what's going on and stick some music behind it and go through it, but it's probably easier for me to cut through to the bits where we're waiting. Same as last time, we don't need DHCP being installed this time because anything that joins the LAN side of the network, I'm going to use manual addressing for. There we go. I'm going to stick my password in so it can automatically log back on when it needs to. And now it's going to give us a heads up that it needs like 30 minutes or so to go through this process, which is where we went last time, but it failed because it couldn't add the DNS part. And what we're looking for this time is for it to succeed because I've already added DNS Server. Where's our Small Business Server disk? And it goes back to A again. Let's stick it back to the right location, which is V in this case. Let's just want the root of the drive. It just wants the root of the drive. Now this is the point at which it failed last time: network configuration and domain configuration. SBS 2003 is installed, and this is what you get on the final reboot and auto login. Now we're going to go through the complete configuration and set the server up as part of the video. But before we do that, I'm going to do the connect to the internet first because I want to get remote access to this server so that I can do this at my desktop and talk to the camera at the same time rather than us got the camera on the screen. And we'll go through that bit now. I can remember when that was a big deal to choose broadband. It had been dial-up for ages. You'd have an ISDN adapter in the server and you would dial up ISDN and get 64K connection. And when broadband became a thing, that was a really exciting moment to choose broadband. Now you wouldn't even think about it, but then it was a big deal. And this is the options. You've got a router, a connection that uses PPOE, or a direct broadband connection. And that's the one that we're going to go with, a direct broadband connection. This is the network connection and it's using DHCP, which is right because it's going to pick up an address from my internal Google Home network. And at this stage, this is not putting the ISA server. This is not Microsoft's server product for a firewall that we're putting on here. This is a wizard that Microsoft included in SBS so you could turn a second network card into a connection to the internet. And you can see that that's said here, internet connection, local connection there. That firewall there is a very basic firewall. It's Windows firewall. And this would allow you to have inbound connection. So which services are going to come inbound and connect to this server. And I am going to add RDP, which was the TCP protocol on 3389. Now, of course, it's saying that one already exists. That already exists because it's an exception in Windows Firewall. That's what I've missed there. This published the Outlook Web Access and Remote Web Workplace websites that are hosted on the SBS box from the internet. And it was interesting to see what they would allow you to do. You could access quite a few different services that were on the SBS server from the internet. And you could also allow access to the entire Internet Information Services installation from the internet, which is not something you'd want to do. In this case, I'm not going to allow anything at the moment. I only want RDP coming in. I'm not going to change the email configuration, and we'll let that finish and make its changes to Windows Firewall and some of the network configuration on the server. Then I should be able to go back to my desk and connect to this server and access it via RDP on 3389. Which of course now is something that you would never do without using a VPN and other forms of multi-factor authentication, because it has been exploited so much in the wild. But I'm not saying it wasn't exploitable at this point in time in 2005. It was, but it was not seen as a bigger risk as it is now. Yeah, we'll enable those password policies as well while we're here. Passwords must meet minimum length requirements, complexity, change regularly. That's an interesting one. Change regularly. You wouldn't do that now. That's actually known to be a risk. As I would also say is complexity requirements in a sense, because it's very hard for people to remember. What you want is something that's easier to remember, maybe 3 words joined together with a dash symbol, which would be much more secure. I'm not going to change any of those. I'm just going to OK them. Right, it's going to say we're connected to the internet, but it isn't going to work because we need legacy update installed to do that. Let's go and see if we can get connected via my Mac on the desktop. And we will tick that as done. Back to being connected remotely to the server now. You can see that although SBS server wasn't designed to be run and managed by the business owner, it did break down what you would have normally done with individual servers into a more wizard-based checklist, easier to follow process, perhaps you might call it. And you can see this here with the server management tool. It would give you a checklist of things to do to configure the server. And then on the left-hand side, it would give you a lot of what you might call more simple tools to set up a server. Alongside, underneath, you can see the enterprise level tool sets that you would use when you're setting up multiple servers from Microsoft. Security best practices are quite enjoyable here, really, because it brings up a help file. And I don't know how many people used to read help files back in the day. Let me know in the comments if you used to read them. I read bits and pieces of them, but mostly you didn't read them. They were difficult to search. The index wasn't very good either. You can bring that up here. You'd have an index on here of everything that was in it by word, but it really wasn't that helpful. And search wasn't great. So you didn't really read these very often, and yet you were meant to. And they contained all the information that you were meant to know for how you configure your server. So it was an interesting time for how you would learn this information, because the internet was clearly up and running and had been for about 8 years or so, but there wasn't as much information on how to do something as there is now. And certainly at this point, YouTube wasn't up and running, so you couldn't go and watch a video on it. There wouldn't have been any podcasts on it. You really had to buy books a lot of the time. Windows 2003 Small Business Server book, and then, about that thick, big, heavy-duty hardback books, and you'd buy those and read them and learn it that way. Configuring remote access to the server, if we go through the setup wizard, this was about dialing in and connecting VPN access to the service. And did you want to allow VPN access? Well, back then, we did used to do this. VPN access dialing into the external interface of the server was a pretty common thing to do. The DHCP server address is going to be the server itself. So that's 10.1. And this is the domain name of the server. So that's ntn.local. And we'll let that finish off setting that up. Now, this is going to configure this VPN to use point-to-point tunneling protocol, which now is no longer considered secure. And it would use MS-CHAP. I'm not going to enable the policies because we've already had that wizard come up. It used MS-CHAP as the encryption, but it was a very, very common way to connect it into the server. Let's see if we can bring up where that configuration setting is. Removing a remote access was what it was. I think that's probably going to be best taken straight off. Yeah, it's taken straight off the administrative tools. So let's maximize this up. So routing a remote access is configured. So we have a look at the properties. And it'll act both as a router and as a remote access server. Now, I generally tended to switch router off because you didn't usually on a small business network have any other subnets or any other VLANs. It was one flat network, and so there was no need for it to act as a router. Authentication methods on the server for dialing in, and there it is, MS Chat version 2 and MS Chat. Those were the two that were generally used. I mean, you could go down to an unencrypted password if you wanted to. You can even go, you don't even need to authenticate to VPN in. Kind of mad to think that this stuff was available back then. Accounting provider is your Windows account, is what it's saying there, rather than having a Radius account, which was a separate way of authenticating a dial-in user to the server. It's going to give out IP addresses based off DHCP, which means what happened here was it would give out an IP address from the same range as the LAN client. And what would often happen is that somebody would take a laptop home, dial into the server, then the laptop would have given an IP address based on it and added to DNS based on its network name. And so you'd have two entries in DNS with two different IP addresses and the same DNS name. So say it was khlaptop.ntn.local. It would end up in DNS with two IP addresses, one for the dial-in and one for when it was on the LAN. And that could then cause problems when you got back into the network, because name resolution would fail, because it would name resolute to the IP address that was used when you dialed in rather than when you were on the network. And so actually it made more sense here to switch to a static port and assign a different IP subnet for dial-in protocol. It would make more sense, and we're going to do that now. This one. Change the subnet. So that when a client dials in, it gets a different range, which means when it had that entry in DNS, it didn't clash with the existing subnet. And that was a better way of handling that situation. Point-to-point protocol was what was being used, and logging, you would log errors and warnings. I would log all events, and that would go, we'll restart the service. That would go in the event log, which meant you could see when people dialed in and when they didn't dial in. And you could also see events and errors when they dialed in, they got the wrong password, or they hadn't got the right protocol encryption on their machine, they hadn't set up their VPN client properly. Back on the checklist again, probably mentioned earlier, we're going to leave activate your server for now, because that requires us to install legacy update to get all the appropriate SSL certificates and all of the trusted root certificates for SSL working again. Client access licenses allowed you to put client accesses onto the server, because Small Business Server was licensed to a number of specific users. And I believe at this time it started out with 25, which meant you could have up to 25 people connected to the server before you needed to upgrade the product to the full Microsoft Active Directory and come out of Small Business Server, which was a migration tool you could do. It was a whole different video, whole different thing. So the licenses were paper licenses, and you would enter those onto the server as shown here. You'd put those in, give you a license code, you'd go next, and then it would activate online or via the telephone, which was the other option of the time, which was to activate via the telephone again for your licenses. And until you did that, you would only be able to until you did that, you're only allowed 5 concurrent connections to the server. So the 6th person who tried to access a map network drive or access the server in some way would be rejected. You could only have 5 people on at once, and you added the client licenses in packs of 5 client access licenses. I don't have any of those. I probably could dig around on the internet and find some, but for the purposes of what I'm doing in the video, there's no need, because I'm not going to have more than 5 people connecting to the server at any one point in time. Adding a printer. Fabulous. Who doesn't love a printer, eh? That's going to be as straightforward as connecting it to the network. 2005, you would have had network printers. They would have been more expensive for sure. And probably what most likely would happen was you would have took an existing printer that had a parallel port on it, and then you would have got a little adapter which plugged into the parallel port and had a network connection in the back. D-Link made a lot of these. I've spotted a few of them on eBay, and I'll probably pick one up and make a video about it that show you how they'd work, how you'd convert a regular printer into a network-based printer. A lot of the time, there was a directly connected printer to the server. It was connected via parallel port or USB, and you went up to the server and you picked your paper off the printer that was next to the server. That was not an uncommon thing at the time. Add some users and computers. Yes, we can do that. And this wizard was kind of interesting here, because it went through a lot of things for you. It would add an account. It would add a mailbox on Exchange server. It had a home folder for you on the server, put you in different groups, distribution groups, give you access to SharePoint, give you a disk quota, and it would set up a client computer for you. So it again, you can see here how this is doing a lot of the work you would have to have done individually at the enterprise level. It's bunching it together and doing it for you in a wizard. And it even gave you different templates of what permissions that users had, what permission you could have to the network. User template was the most common. Printers, folders, fax devices, email, and the internet. Mobile users gets the extra one, gets in the VPN group, gets put in the group for allowed VPNs. Power user. I always loved power user. Microsoft don't talk about that anymore. But in the late 90s and early noughties, power user was a thing. And you can see it can manage groups and users. It can manage who logs onto the server. It was a bit shy of really administrator, which is where you would find your person like me, your IT person. Your power user, maybe that would be given to a manager in the office, usually the person who did accounts. Maybe it was the association with money and trust that was done, that was given to them. But generally, everybody was a user on the network. So let's add a user to our network, and we'll add my favorite employee, thanks to Homer Simpson, who was Max Power, and a simple password for Max Power there. And we'll add them. They've been added. We're not going to set up any computers yet because we haven't got any. And I haven't decided what I'm going to use to connect to this SBS yet. I think I'm probably going to use a compact laptop, but we haven't set that up yet, so I'm not going to add them. And that's going to go through the process now of setting up that account, putting it into certain specific groups, adding it to SharePoint, and it's an account that we can use to demonstrate access to the server. Faxing was interesting. Faxing was still a big thing in 2005 for sure. I had many customers who required the ability to receive faxes and send faxes electronically. And for a few years, this was really popular. And it was also a bit of a pain in the backside to do, to be honest, because you're going to need a modem. And you're also going to need to show users how to scan in paper or how to actually create the faxes on the computer before they sent them, and then how to get them in their email so that they can receive them. Now, it's looking for a device here to do this, and we haven't got one, so I wonder if it'll let us carry on. Yeah. We can carry on without one. Yeah, you can actually carry on without one. Here you would need a modem, and I don't have one. And I would have used a US Robotics external modem. I went through loads of different modems, and this would have been the one that I used. I'll put it on the screen now, because internal modem cards were simply not reliable enough. They needed to be reset too often, which meant restarting the server. But an external USB modem running over a serial port, which the server would have had, were brilliant. They were really, really reliable. And ultimately, they just kept on trucking. They kept on working. And that's what I would have used for sending and receiving faxes on the server. I'm not sure if there's going to be any way that I can simulate this, because I don't have a device that's going to do inbound or outbound faxing, but I've set the wizard up anyway. We might be able to see some of the interfaces for it. Monitoring. SBS had a lot of built-in monitoring tools that most people never used or even knew about, specifically giving you alerts as well to tell you what was going on. So yeah, you could have a daily performance report about how the server was operating, which made a lot of assumptions, I think, about what people thought was actually going on. I can't think of anybody that would have used these unless you were an internal IT person. Possibly if you worked for a company and it was your job to run this, you might have enabled that and been able to see what was happening in terms of performance on the server. But I think equally you'd probably have used your server so much or had other third-party tools that you wouldn't have based it off that report. And usage report in server management was quite helpful. Again, if you wanted to know what people were doing, how much email they were using, how often they were on the internet, when did they VPN in, that would have given you that information. You can say then who can view these usage reports. At the moment, we've only got domain admins, but here you could have added the owner of the business, the managing director or a manager or something for that purpose. And you could have them sent by email as well, so that when there were errors on the server, and it suggests here low disk space services that are stopped, you would get them. But I was using MSP tools at this point, remote management tools that would tell me when services stopped or restart them automatically, and would tell me when disk space was low. And likely I would have thought if you were the IT manager, you would have done something similar yourself. But Microsoft was trying here to give you some tools for free to monitor and manage your server that weren't included as a standard on a server for you. So if we activate all of those, we can have a look afterwards at what some of these do and how they operated and whether there was any value in them. I think there probably was some value, but I think it was highly likely that you would have invested in a third-party product to have assisted you with this process to make sure that you didn't miss anything that was obvious, such as low disk space on the server. And that's just going to finish through setting up those thresholds now. Mark that one. And the final one, backup. Pretty important stuff, making sure you've got a backup. And it's going to set up whether you wanted to back up to tape or hard drive. It was a crossover period at this point in time between tapes and hard drives. Now, we haven't got the driver for the tape drive installed at the moment, but I'm going to, and I'll get that when Legacy Update goes on. But here you've got the option to back up to a hard disk. Now, that would have been a USB hard disk. It would have been a USB disk, and it would have been a 2.5-inch disk in a plastic caddy. And around 2005, I was probably halfway between people who still had tape drives and people who were starting to back up to disk. Backing up to disk was faster. It was faster to write to the disk. It was easier to switch that around and recover it because I could take that hard drive, plug it into another computer and have that backup information on any other computer I wanted to. I didn't need the tape drive. Whereas backing up to tape meant I had to have the equivalent tape drive somewhere else. And often I didn't have that because the tape drives I was selling were HP DDS tape drives. And they went through DDS 2, 3, and 4, and then up to 5. And then there were Sony AIT tape drives that were around for a while, and they went AIT 1, 2, and 3. And then some people had LTO drives, quantum LTO drives. And so for us as an IT provider to keep an existing tape drive to match all of our customers' kit would have been really expensive. Probably would have ran into the £10,000 plus. But once we started backing up to hard drives, we were just dealing with hard drives and files. It meant that we didn't have to any of that hardware to do test recoveries. So backup to hard disk was a big deal. Now, we won't run through this at the moment because I said I'm going to do multiple videos on the SBS and we'll do a backup and recovery to a hard drive in a different video. So we're not going to do that one and we're not going to tick it off. But that was roughly around where backup was at that time. I'm going to end the video here. We've got Small Business Server installed. We've added a user and we're ready to go into each of the individual components of the server. In the next video, we'll use Legacy Update again to update the server and activate it. And then we will start having a look at the first part of Small Business Server, Microsoft Exchange Server. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, subscribe to the video channel because that would mean a lot to me. And I'll catch you in the next one. Ta-da.